It started in the shadows, a mission that was about to change the entire global balance of power, and almost no one saw it coming. Today, we're going to break down exactly how Operation Absolute Resolve went down.
You know, in the months leading up to the raid, there were no big press conferences, no dramatic declarations. It was just quiet. U.S. Navy ships were slowly, deliberately rotating through the Caribbean. CIA teams were slipping into Venezuela. And all of it completely under the radar. The world's media, they were focused on a million other things. And why wouldn't they be? On the surface, absolutely nothing was happening. But way up high, surveillance drones were circling, watching, building a complete picture of Maduro's life, learning every single secret that would eventually be used against him. So, by the time those helicopters finally lifted off over the dark waters of the Caribbean, the mission was already a done deal. It was unstoppable. Every piece on the chessboard was exactly where it needed to be for the final checkmate. So, to really get how this raid was even possible, you have to understand the target. You have to understand the long, long road that led U.S. forces right to his front door. Believe me, this was years in the making. So, let's talk about Nicolás Maduro. Honestly, he was never supposed to last this long. Yeah, he inherited a powerful security state from Hugo Chavez, but under his watch, Venezuela just plunged into a total crisis. We're talking an economy in an absolute freefall, and corruption so out of control that you couldn't tell where the government ended and organized crime began. He took power back in 2013, but the real breaking point? That came in 2020. That's when the U.S. Department of Justice actually indicted him on narco-terrorism charges. Then, after a completely fraudulent election in 2024, Washington stopped asking if they should act, and they started planning how. And they put a number on it, a $15 million bounty for his capture. Now, Maduro just laughed it off at the time, called it political theater. But what he didn't realize was this was a clear signal. This was no longer about diplomacy. This was personal. And that's when the quiet pressure campaign got very loud, very physical, and totally impossible to ignore. This is really where the opening moves of the operation began. By August of 2025, you could feel the pressure building. U.S. forces surged into the region, officially for counter-narcotics, but we all know they were really setting the stage. At the same time, the CIA was mapping out every tiny detail of Maduro's life, not just where he went, but when he slept, what he ate, even the daily routines of his pets. And out at sea, his regime's lifelines were getting choked off. Oil tankers were seized and smuggling networks got hit, hard. And look, there was zero ambiguity about the goal here. As the White House later put it, the objective was simple. This wasn't some warning shot. These were deliberate, painful blows designed to force him to surrender. There was one last shot at a diplomatic off-ramp that November. Talks were held, but they went nowhere. And then, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group arrived in the Caribbean. And let's be real, a 97,000-ton warship doesn't negotiate. It just waits for orders. Okay, so this brings us to the final days. The plan was locked and loaded, the forces were in place, and the window for any kind of peaceful resolution was slamming shut. The world was about to see what happens when months of meticulous planning meet one man's refusal to back down. Maduro was offered a way out. He could have taken exile in Turkey. He said no. Then, just a few days after Christmas, President Trump reportedly called him directly. The demand was simple and final. You gotta surrender. Maduro hesitated, and then he refused again. And that was it. That single word, no, set the final pieces in motion. The time for talk was officially over. The clock was now ticking. By the first couple of days of January 2026, the sheer scale of the force was just staggering. We're talking over 15,000 U.S. personnel on standby. And this wasn't just anybody. This was Delta Force, the FBI's hostage rescue team, DEA agents, Special Ops Aviation units, the best of the best, all of them just waiting for a single word. And then, that word came. A sudden change in the weather. The clouds cleared, a full moon rose over Caracas, and it gave the commanders the perfect window they'd been waiting for. So now, let's get into the minute-by-minute breakdown of the raid itself. At 10:46 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the order came down from Mar-a-Lago. Good luck and Godspeed. And just like that, over 150 aircraft from 20 different locations launched at the exact same time. A literal storm of F-22s, F-35s, bombers, and drones, all converging on Venezuela. At 1:01 a.m., the assault began. Helicopters, flying just 30 meters over the water to stay off the radar, dropped operators right into Maduro's compound.
They immediately started taking fire, but the U.S. aircraft circling above returned it with controlled, overwhelming precision. Delta Force blew the doors on the safe house, and Maduro made a run for a reinforced safe room, but he just couldn't lock the door in time. He was trapped. There was no escape. It was over. Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, surrendered. The primary mission, to capture him alive, was complete. But believe me, the story was far from over.
The raid was a huge tactical success, no doubt, but the strategic consequences? They were just beginning. The aftershock of this operation wasn't just political, it was economic on a scale that's almost hard to wrap your head around. It literally redrew the energy map of the world overnight. At the heart of this whole thing were the pilots of the 160th SOAR, better known as the Night Stalkers. Their motto says it all: Night Stalkers don't quit. These guys are legendary for flying where no one else can or will. Eyewitness videos showed their helicopters literally weaving between buildings in Caracas at roofed-up level. It was a textbook mission that military analysts are going to be studying for decades.
But why? Why risk so much for one man? Well, this number right here is the reason. 303 billion barrels of crude oil. That's Venezuela's proven reserves. That is the largest on the entire planet. And that is the key to understanding the enormous geopolitical stakes of this whole operation. To put that in perspective for you, even at a modest price of $57 a barrel, that oil is worth over $17 trillion. This isn't just about money, it's about global influence. For years, Russia and China had been propping up Maduro's regime, and in return, they got a strategic foothold right in America's backyard. In one night, all those investments were wiped out. Control over the world's largest energy reserve shifted, giving Washington immense leverage over global markets and challenging the dominance of countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia. As one analyst put it, most people don't realize how much the world just changed. Which really just leaves us with this final thought. For years, Maduro survived everything they threw at him. Sanctions, indictments, internal dissent, you name it. So how did it all just end? So suddenly. In just a few hours, under a full moon, with a team of elite operators walking him out of his own home in handcuffs. It's a pretty stark reminder that in the world of geopolitics, power can shift in the blink of an eye.